Okay, great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So this is our third session, our third in a series of 5 on Megilat Esther, and welcome to everyone. And so this week we are overall we've been thinking very deeply about the Megillah's characters, and this has been a um, unique, I think, look and perspective with which to look at the Megillah, which is through the eyes of the characters, also through the eyes of the Malbim, really. So we focused, as you know, many of you have been here, I think, in both sessions. We focused on Achashverosh, we focused on Haman. This week we're going to turn towards the good side of the force, and we're going to focus our attention on Esther, Queen Esther. And we're going to put some different strands together today to kind of weave a picture of Esther. She is, the other characters that we've seen have been relatively straightforward. We saw Achashverosh and his, what his angle was and what he was aiming to do, and we saw Haman last week, and he was, he was certainly smart, but we saw his evil, and but unlike those two, Esther is really far more multifaceted and far more nuanced than the other two characters who we've studied. It's harder to put our finger on exactly what her character is about and what her qualities are. And so we're going to try to explore some of that. But I think the character comes from her nuance and her multifaceted qualities. That's point number one. Point number two is that I hope we see today, besides for the nuanced quality of Esther, is that great people move the world. They are influencers in the world. Great people are forces. And I hope that we see by the end of today that Esther was a great person and that she was a force. Like Achashverosh and Haman, who we've studied, and Mordechai, who we will study, she also exerted great power, great influence, but it was different than the others. So, I want us to be able to note that she was a great person, a great power, but I also want to note that how she used her power, how she influenced the people around her was qualitatively different, I believe, and I think the Malbim argues, than those others who we studied. Okay, I'm actually gonna put mute. I think it will just help us a little bit, but feel free to any time, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. Okay, great. Okay, let's get started. Okay, I'm going to move this down. Okay, so we're going to read a number of passages like we've done in the past. We're going to read a number of passages together. These are taken from different parts of the Megillah. I have labeled where they're from, and by the way, I'm happy to share these slides with you. And anyone who's interested, please feel free to email me. But we're going to take the Megillah again. It actually happens to be that we'll take it sequentially, but we're not going to read it straight. We're going to take some different passages and analyze them. Okay, so the first passage we're going to take is from is the first time we're introduced to Esther, and this is from Perek Bet, from chapter 2, and the pasuk says that he, Mordechai, was a foster father to Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. The maiden was shapely and beautiful, and when her father and mother died, Mordechai adopted her as his own daughter. Okay, so let's just stop here for a moment and think about what do we know now about Esther? So we know that she was, first of all, interestingly, she had two names. It's interesting on its face. She had both the name Esther and the name Hadassah, the Megilat tells us. She was an orphan. Mordechai was her first cousin. Mordechai adopted her. She was a beautiful woman, a beautiful young woman, and Mordechai not only adopted her, but I mean to say that he raised her as a daughter, as he would a daughter. Okay, and that was the relationship between Mordechai and Esther, was one of of a stepfather, adopted father, and adopted daughter. Okay, again, feel free to ask any questions. Okay, so now I would like to explore with you, and I want to spend some time on a Gemara that that explores this idea of Esther's two names. So let's go. Okay, so the Gemara in Megillah says, the Gemara in Megillah Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara says as follows. Interesting, very interesting Gemara. There's a lot to say. There's a lot more to say on this Gemara than we're going to say, but we have a lot to say on this Gemara too. So, okay, let's get into it. The verse says the Gemara, the verse states, and he brought up Hadassah, this is the verse we just saw, and he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther. She is referred to as Hadassah, and she is referred to as Esther, says the Gemara. What was her real name? It is taught, by the way, the bold is what actually the Gemara says, and the other is the I forget the word for it, but intercolated words that help us understand what the Gemara is saying. But anyway, what was her real name? It is taught in a Braita that the sages differed in their opinion as to which was in fact her name and which was a description. Okay, so the Gemara is bothered by the same problem we said, which was what was her real name and what's with the two names. So first opinion, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said Esther was her real name. Why then was she called Hadassah? On account of the righteousness on account of the righteous who are called myrtles, Hadassim, Hadassah is Hadass. And so it states, and he stood amongst the myrtles, Ha-Hadassim. That's from Zechariah. Okay, so the first answer of Rabbi Meir is, he tells us a little more that we didn't know. Esther really was her given name. She was called Esther. Her parents called her Esther, whatever. She had the name Esther from birth. But she was called Hadassah. And Hadassah means literally myrtle. And it's a reference to the fact that she was righteous. And righteous people are called myrtles. Righteous people are called Hadassim. Okay. So and that's why she was called Hadassah. And so the Malbim makes a big point of this to say that if you look at the main quality of Esther, it was her righteousness. She was a righteous woman, and for this righteousness, she got this acquired name. She got this nickname of Hadassah. Okay, I want to talk here for a moment and present to you something. The Malbim does not say this, but I saw this in the commentary of Chastei Hashem on the Ein Yaakov, which I want to share with you. And it's to me, this is a mind-blowing, unbelievable explanation. So I want to share with you, even though the Malbim doesn't say it. Okay, so he says, why exactly is the myrtle associated with righteousness? So and why specifically, given that fact, why specifically is Esther associated with the Hadass? Okay, there are a lot of things we could assume would be righteous. We could have called her all kinds of names, but why specifically the myrtle? So what he says is that the myrtle has a pleasant smell, but interestingly, the pleasant smell of the myrtle is only powerful at close range. So you have a lot of spices that are very fragrant, very overwhelming, some overwhelmingly fragrant. You walk into a room and you can smell an etrog. You walk into a room and you can smell cumin. You walk into a room and you can overpoweringly smell, whatever it is, garlic. Okay, so these are very powerful smells. The myrtle also has a smell, but it only operates, it's only powerful at close range. So the Chastei Hashem says this also was Esther. Esther had power, but her power was most impacting on her inner circle. And so just to explain this a little bit, there are different kinds of powers that we have in the universe. There's gravity. So gravity is powerful. It's powerful on a very cosmic level. There's an interplay between the sun and the earth, very, very far away from each other, but the gravitational force of the sun even impacts the earth, in our tides, etc. Okay, so that's a cosmic kind of a force. It may be a weak force, but it's a very cosmic force. There are other forces that exert power on an atomic level. So there's a force actually that controls the relationship within an atom, that makes sure that an atom stays its, it stays its shape and stays its, keeps the parts of an atom together. So that's a force that exerts, it's called a strong nuclear force. And that force exerts its power on a very local, small level, an individual level. It doesn't have power like, across cosmic place. So too, says the Ein Yaga, but that was my explanation, but he doesn't say about the powers. But anyway, Chasdei Hashem says that some great righteous people exert their righteousness on a very macro level. I would say, for example, Mordechai, we'll see him next week. He exerted his righteousness globally. But here's the point. Esther, Hadassah, she exerted her righteous influence no less powerfully than Mordechai, but her righteous power was exerted interpersonally on a very small scale. Not better, not worse than Mordechai, just different. It was most effective for her personality. So the name Hadassah, which means myrtle, what is the myrtle? It has a good smell, that's the righteousness, but the good smell only exerts its power locally. That's why Esther, who tended to exert her righteousness and her power and her influence on a small scale, that's why, says the Chasdei Hashem, was Esther called Hadassah. Okay. Any questions on that point? I think it's a very important introduction to our understanding of Esther. Any questions? Okay. I just want to run through because they're interesting, and I found them interesting. So we'll just run through them. I do want to share with you. There were a couple other examples of answers to the question of why it is that she was named Hadassah, or was she named Esther. So the Gemara also says, quotes Rabbi Yehuda, he says differently. He says her real name was actually Hadassah. Why was she called Esther? It's because she concealed. The word Esther is from the Shoresh Samech Taf Resh, to hide. So she concealed the truth about herself. Okay, that's another explanation. So really her name was Hadassah. She acquired the name Esther because she hid her identity. Okay, another one. Rabbi Nechemiah says also Hadassah was her real name. Why was she called Esther? Esther was a non-Jewish name. Actually, Esther was related to Ishtar or Ishtahar. And Ishtahar was the word for Venus. So Venus was beautiful, and Venus is associated with beauty. So too Esther, although her real name was Hadassah, but the non-Jewish nations called her Esther, and that's how she got that name, after her beauty. Okay, the last couple explanations, again, first for the interest of time, they're interesting. One of them says that the myrtle tree is not particularly, it's very average in terms of height. So too Esther, was maybe of average height. Okay, and so it's not really, she was beautiful, but she was of average height. And the last one is that she was green. She was green like a myrtle tree. Green is not typically associated, it's not easy being green. So it's not associated typically with beauty. However, it doesn't say olive, it says green, but Hashem extended her a chut shel chesed, which means that Hashem's providence helped people see her as being beautiful because of her beautiful insides, her beautiful personality. So that came out, despite the fact she was green, it came out as her being beautiful. Again, it's not, I don't know whether it's literal or not, but the point is that her beauty came, according to that position, her beauty came from her inner beauty more than her physical appearance. Okay, so that's the Gemara. But the main point I want to walk away from this Gemara with is the first opinion, which is that she was righteous. She was really called Esther, but she developed this name of Hadassah, and her righteousness was powerful, very powerful, and very becoming. She was righteous, but it was exerted on a small scale. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, let's read back to the Megilah. Let's read a little more. Now we're going to see a little more about what happened to Esther when after she had been adopted by Mordechai and raised by Mordechai. So we skipped a little bit. Let's keep going here. All right. So when the king's order and edict were proclaimed, and when many girls were assembled in the fortress Shushan under the supervision of Haggai, Esther too was taken into the king's palace. Esther too was taken to the king's palace under the supervision of Haggai, guardian of the women. The girl pleased him and won his favor, and he hastened to furnish her with her cosmetics and her rations, as well as with the 7 maids who were due from the king's palace. And he treated her and her maids with special kindness in the harem. Esther did not reveal her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Okay, so this passage is discussing the king's order, which we didn't read, but that he wanted to replace Vashti. Vashti was gone now, and he wanted to replace her with a new queen. And the way in which he organized the plan to find a new queen was to, besides for his own harem, he also had a competition, or he had a challenge, which was to find all of the young women in the kingdom, bring them to the king's palace in Shushan, and each one he'd find whether she was going to be the queen through being with her for the evening. And so Esther, as we'll see, actually we're going to explore this a little more later, but Esther was one of those who was taken into the king's palace. Okay, but at this point, what I want to focus on is the last sentence, which is the last pasuk, which is that Esther did not reveal her people or her kindness, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Okay, I just give me 1 second. I'm sorry. 1 second. I had printed and then reprinted, but I made some notes that I just wanted to make sure I incorporated. Okay, so this last pasuk is very important pasuk from the perspective of thinking about making sure that we are not that we're reading the Megillah not from our frame. Let me go back a step. When we read the Megillah, and we read it so often, twice a year and more, I can't speak for you, I tend to read the Megillah with the end in mind, or at least colored with the end in mind. I learned this from one of my teachers, that it's extremely important to read the Megillah from the eyes of the characters who are in the Megillah. And it's not just about the Megillah, it's any narrative. That you have to understand the Megillah from what they knew, and only from what they knew at the time in which they were experiencing the events. So this pasuk is I think a case in point for this approach. Esther did not reveal herself or her people or kindred, for Mordecai had told her not to reveal it. Why did Mordecai tell Esther not to reveal herself? Any thoughts on that? Again, I'll share the Malbim's approach. Again, Esther was taken. She was taken to the king's palace. She was now she was going to be one of these people who was in the harem, one of these young women who was going to be prepared for her meeting with her encounter with the king. Why did Mordecai instruct Esther not to reveal who she was? Any thoughts? All right, so I'll just share with you from my perspective. I always thought about that she's Jewish, and so Mordecai didn't want maybe wanted to plant her there, and you may think that Mordecai knew what was going to happen, and so he needed a plant, or he didn't want her to reveal it so she could become queen, or I don't know, you start to think about all these possibilities, but the answer actually is very simple, says the Malbim. The answer is you got to think about Mordecai. He knew nothing at this time about what was going to happen with Haman. He knew nothing about what was going to happen with Achashverosh. He didn't know all that stuff. All he knew was what the Megillah has told us to date, which is that Achashverosh offed Vashti. There was a proclamation to have a competition and a contest. Esther was taken, and that's where they were. So according to the Malbim explains that the reason why Mordecai told her not to reveal herself was why? Because that if she would not reveal her lineage, the king would definitely throw her out of the palace. That's why he told her not to reveal herself. She was as far as the king knew, she was an orphan. She was, not even orphan, she didn't know. I'm sorry. She was a nothing. So the king would the king would think the reason why Esther is not revealing who she was because Esther really had a terrible lineage. Esther had an inferior lineage. And so that's the reason why the king would think that she was hiding it. And so the king would be displeased or would be distasteful to the king about this bad lineage. And he would just throw her out of her ear. He would get rid of her. And so it was the best strategy from Mordecai's perspective. It was the best strategy to get Esther out of the clutches of this king who wanted to be with her and basically violate her. So that was Mordecai's strategy, nothing more, nothing less. Get Esther out of the clutches of the king. So again, I think it's really important in reading this, and Malbim's perspective, certainly has this, which is read the Megillah for what we know about the facts, and not reading into the story things that we don't necessarily know yet. We know because we're an omniscient reader, but it was not yet known to Mordecai. Okay. Any questions? All right, let's move on. All right, so this next slide I want to read. This is more background, and then
Rabbi?
Please, go ahead.
I was just going to say that, when thinking about it, if Mordecai is in the court, then he's familiar with all of the back and forth as to what happened to Vashti. And if he hides Esther's lineage or her identity, then it's the ultimate flexibility for him if, God forbid, something, happens where he might be able to intercede. In other words, I think it gives him a tremendous amount of political flexibility.
So even if his plan doesn't work to have her thrown out
we
on
don't
her
know
ear, it still will work. It will still help.
We don't know what's going to be in the future.
Right. It keeps
We just know
balls
that
in
we've
play.
got a king who is, seems to be maybe fickle. I mean, he loves Vashti. He kills Vashti. He listens to this wacky advisor that he's got named Haman. I mean, Mordecai at this point would be fearful for Esther, and if he's hiding her identity, then he's got flexibility to, protect her or maybe intercede for her or that kind of thing. I think it gives him political flexibility to not reveal who she is.
Keeps the most balls in play.
He hid that she was an orphan. Was that something to do being an orphan?
Hide everything. Hide everything.
Because, for example, in Yemen, when an orphan, they usually take them to the kingdom. They belong to the kingdom. So I'm thinking because she was an orphan, he didn't want to know that she's an orphan. She might be taken anyway as a slave, whatever. Could that be?
Could be. It certainly would. The Malbim says the way the Malbim understands is that he wanted to make her as detestable as possible to the king. So I don't know whether an orphan would do that or not. It might, but more importantly than being orphaned, because people are orphaned all the time, that's not the main issue. The main issue is that were your parents people of stature? Were there people of who had themselves lineage? Were they royal people? Esther came from a proud nation. It's true that the Jewish people were taken and they were low, but going back and back and back, these were people who had royalty in their blood. So I think that was more the point that Mordecai was trying to focus on.
Now one more question. It says that she was taken, which means by force or somehow they just took any girls?
They took all the girls by force, yes.
Just came and took them without any distinguishing between them or anything. Just a beautiful girl was taken?
Yes.
And that's all. Okay.
Yes. I mean, this is terrible. It's catastrophic. Now, I mean, I don't know. Maybe for some people, this was a ticket to be part of the palace. So I don't know. For some women, I have no idea. I mean, I have no idea. I don't have any knowledge. But as a policy, this was a life altering. This was a life, albeit in the world in which they lived. This may have been common in royalty, but certainly this was something that was kidnapping girls and putting them forcibly in service of the king was something that was, from a personal perspective, catastrophic. And certainly for Esther, who not only had her own life to live, but she was a Jewish woman, this was, who had her own values. This was something that was tremendous, that was really catastrophic. And we're going to talk more about this point in a little bit. Okay.
And Mordechai could not do anything just to tell her not to say who she is.
That's all he could do.
He could have done.
All he could do. That's correct. That's all he could do. That's right. Okay. So let's go a little more. We're going to get a little more. We're going to read this quickly. And again, please feel free to ask any questions you have. I know. I saw actually in the chat. I just want to respond to. So Mordechai, I think someone said that Mordechai was maybe doing this because of Haman. So I just want to point out that interaction with Haman had not happened yet. So it's important. That's exactly what I was trying to say before, which is that. So someone said, I think Cindy said here, because of her relationship with Mordechai, he didn't want Haman to know. Okay, but that's the point, which is that if that did not happen until later. That I believe is Perek Gimel. So that interaction with Haman was not what was particular, if I'm not mistaken, was not exactly what was concerning Haman. Well, concerning Mordechai. Mordechai was only focused on the issue of get Esther out of the clutches of the king. Okay. That's exactly what I would have said before I read the Malbim. That's exactly what I would have said, and it's exactly what I learned in reading the Malbim is keep the characters, the narrative of the character straight, so that you know what the person knew when they knew it. Good. All right, let's read a little more so we get some background. Every single day, Mordechai would walk about in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was faring and what was happening to her. When each girl's turn came to go to Achashverosh at the end of 12 months treatment prescribed for women, for that was the period spent on beautifying them, 6 months with oil of myrrh. I would be curious to know at the end, maybe has anyone ever had an oil of myrrh treatment? I would like to know that. But anyway, and 6 months with perfumes and women's cosmetics. And it was after that that the girl would go to the king. Whatever she asked would be given to her. This is important. Sorry, let me go slowly here. Whatever she asked for would be given her to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. Back to the general narrative. She would go in the evening and leave in the morning for a second harem in charge of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, guardian of the concubines. She would not go again to the king unless the king wanted her, when she would be summoned by name. So that's the general order of operations for the women who were taken into the court of the harem. Then they would go to the king. There was a whole time of year-long preparations in order to prepare them to go see the king, and it culminated in them asking for any gift that they wanted and them getting that gift and then going before the king. Okay, so good. Basically is a payoff, okay, or whatever, make them happy going before the king. Good. Okay, now let's keep going. And I want to spend a lot of time on this slide here. So when the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abichail, the uncle of Mordechai, who had adopted her as his own daughter to go to the king, she did not ask for anything but what Haggai, the king's eunuch, guardian of the women, advised. So again, just to stop for a second, she did not take a gift. Unlike all the other women who were offered to take whatever gift they wanted before they went to the king, she took nothing other than what she had to take. Yet Esther won the admiration of all who saw her. Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is Chodesh Tevet, in the 7th year of his reign. The king loved Esther more than all the other women, and she won his grace and favor more than all the virgins. So he set a royal diadem on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. The king gave a great banquet for all his officials and courtiers, the banquet of Esther. He proclaimed a remission of taxes for the provinces and distributed gifts as befits a king. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordechai sat in the palace gate, but Esther still did not reveal her kindred or her people as Mordechai had instructed her, for Esther obeyed Mordechai's bidding, as she had done when she was under his tutelage. A lot here. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is, let's take a look. The Malbim does this. This is from the Malbim's approach. Let's look first at the first pasuk and read it very carefully. because it's giving us a lot of detail at this point about Esther, which we didn't see before, which the Malbim understands to be important about Esther at this moment. So the pasuk says, and I'm reading kind of the comments into the words. When the turn came, at the top, when the turn came. So Malbim explains, Esther was different than all of the other women. She not only offered beauty and health, but she also offered strength, resilience, and a refined quality. This was what the king saw in her, not just her beauty, not just her form, etc., but that she had an inner beauty, an inner tzidkut, which was very attractive to Achashverosh. Daughter of Avichail. Why does the Megillah incorporate that? She was the inheritor. She inherited good character traits from her father Avichail. That was his name. Avichail means the father of someone who has valor. So he had wonderful traits. He had refined character traits. She inherited. She was the daughter of those refined character traits. The uncle, who was the uncle of Mordechai, who had adopted her. What does that mean? It means that Mordechai nurtured these traits. He himself had them also. He nurtured these traits in Esther, and he brought them out in her. He helped her to refine her own good character traits and be the righteous person that she became. It's different than Mordechai. We'll see later on next week probably how huge he was internationally, not international, but global he was, okay? She was also righteous, but on a smaller scale. So the Malbim further explains that there were three pivotal moments in which Esther tried as she might, and Mordechai tried as he might, unsuccessfully, but tried as they might to keep Esther away from the clutches of Achashverosh. The first was that we saw before, the pasuk says, and she was taken. Okay, that's clear. She did everything she could. Mordechai hid her, even on pain of death potentially. He hid her away in order that she shouldn't be found out. But she was found out and she was taken against her will. She did not want to go to the king, but she was taken against her will. That was a pivotal moment. Next, she would not reveal her peoplehood. So by doing that, we said before the reason why she did that, but in doing that, she and Mordechai was endangering their lives because the people were demanding information and she was not giving this information. You can't hide information from the king. But despite the fact that she hid the information, he still didn't kill her. And in this pasuk here, we see that, I love this point. I think it's a great reading of the Malbim, as if he needs my approbation. But anyway, she refused to take a gift from the king's eunuch. Why did she refuse? And I'm sure on this call we can figure this out. Why did she refuse to take a gift from it's on here. Why did she refuse to take a gift from the king's eunuch before she went to go see the king? Any thoughts on that? Everyone else took a gift. She could have asked for a pony. She could have asked for a Persian, a nice a rice cooker, to make tzaddik. Why did she choose to take no gift at all, as opposed to taking a nice Persian gift that they were offering her anything? I don't know, house, something. Why did she take no gift at all?
Her bitachon that it was up to whatever was supposed to happen was the ultimate goal, not any interference of physical.
Okay.
Tempting.
Keep going with that though, Cindy. Why? Who was she demonstrating that to? Who did she want to prove that point to?
So it would be self-evident to everyone that it wasn't because of her gift or anything external or extra or that made her preference to anyone else. It was totally God intervened.
What was God
Maybe she did
intervening?
not want to
But slow down,
compete with the other
slow
gift.
down. So, but I just want to explore this a little bit. Can I ask you a question back, Cindy? Do you mind? Can I
Yes.
interview you for a minute? Okay. So who was she? Who was she trying to show this bitachon for herself or for Hashem? Who was she? Where was this? Who was the audience?
The king
Anyone. Achashverosh himself, the people, Haggai, the people in the waiting room, the other women, everyone.
Good.
The story, the reader, us.
Okay, all right. I don't know that Esther at this point knew that we were going to be reading her story, but I hear you. But at this moment when she was making this decision to refuse a gift, okay, you want to say that one of the things you said is that Achashverosh was her audience and Haggai was her audience. Good. I want to come back to that. Go ahead, Bracha. You want to say something, please?
giving a gift is a statement. She doesn't want to compete with the other girls.
She doesn't want to compete.
Giving a gift is a statement, something that she
Okay.
would think about it. But probably she did not want to make any statement here. She had her who she is. If she brings something, she will cause other question. So again, she continued that secrecy.
Okay. Anybody else?
I think along what Bracha just said, it almost is like she didn't want to be, maybe she doesn't want to be beholden to the king for anything. In other words, she's not asking for any, she's keeping a very low profile so that, she indicates, I'm not really throwing myself into the race. If something happens, it happens, but it's not because I'm trying to do anything to improve my position to be chosen.
Good. So Abby, let me ask you a question based on what you're saying. Why did the king offer this gift?
Why did the king offer everyone that gift?
Right. What was he trying to do? What was his goal?
It gave him insight.
Maybe endear himself to the.
He wanted to, exactly. He wanted them to want him. He wanted them to be desirous of him. And so in offering this gift, it was part of a strategy to entice these women to, although they were here against their will, likely, he wanted them to be as happy as possible with coming before the king and being with him. So it was a way of basically, paying them off. He was soliciting them for their love and their interest in him.
Buying their love.
Buying their love, exactly. Okay, I use my word soliciting, maybe legally, but anyway. So that's correct. But now let's look at Esther. Let's look at Hadassah. I am not gonna be bought. If you are gonna take me, then you're gonna take me. And I am not going to I'm not going to do anything to show you that this is something that I am in league with you or in agreement with. You are going to have to take me against my will 100%. So, I don't know that she went kicking and screaming. It doesn't tell us that, and Mom doesn't say that, but in essence, that's what she was doing. She was saying, I refuse to show consent and interest in this activity or in this relationship. And so that was a statement. She was making a very bold statement to the king that she is not going to play. She's not going to play ball. Yet, and this is the third, again, number one, she had to be taken. Number two is that she wouldn't reveal her people and she wouldn't reveal who she was. And three is she refused a gift. The Malbim says these are three cases where she basically didn't play ball. Yet, interestingly enough, her charisma on the small scale, i.e., her interaction with Haggai and her interaction with Achashverosh, won these people over to the extent that they did not punish her. Not only did not punish her, they loved her. They loved her, and as we know, she was promoted to queen. So look at that charisma that Esther had. Look at that power that Esther had on the small scale to, despite the fact that she's telling them, I refuse to play by your rules and I refuse to play, not rules, but I refuse to play ball. Despite all that, she nevertheless totally won them over and more. Incredible, this Esther. Incredible. Was it her own internal power? Of course. Was it what Mordechai had cultivated in her? Of course. Was it, like the Gemara said at the end, her inner beauty that was fostered by providence? Likely, of course. We don't know what were the factors that brought this to bear, but ultimately Esther had a power that was up close, personal, overwhelming to the people who she came in contact with. She wasn't a superstar from the perspective of global personage. She was a local, small scale, but incredibly powerful and incredibly forceful. Okay. So we walk away with just to conclude here, we walk away really with two conclusions. One is this power that Esther had, and we see it clearly on display. And the second is that the king was all in for Esther. I mean, all in. She had him. She was all in. Okay, let's move forward. Okay, so again, we need to read a little more background to get to the next point where we're going to conduct some analysis. So we're going to read a little bit, and this is now later in the story. This is in Perek Dalet, chapter 4. So when Mordechai, let's read a little bit, and then after the next slide, we'll spend some time. Okay. So when Mordechai learned all that had happened, Mordechai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes. He went through the city, crying out loudly and bitterly, until he came in the front of the palace gate. For one could not enter the palace gate wearing sackcloth. Also, in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning amongst the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maidens and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordechai to wear, so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther summoned Hattach, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordechai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. Hattach went out to Mordechai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordechai told him all that had happened to him and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him the written law of the text that had been proclaimed in Shushan for their destruction. He bade him show it to Esther and inform her and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. I'll just stop here for 1 second. The Malbim makes it, for those of you who've been on for both sessions, you know that the Malbim had a big point he made about the secrecy of Haman's decree that he wrote against the Jews. It was still secret. So you may ask a question and say, how did Mordechai know this if it was a secret letter? For those of you who remember, and those of you who were on that call, now you know, according to the Malbim. But what the Malbim explains is that Mordechai understand. Look at the first 5-6 words. When Mordechai learned all that had happened, 7 words. So that was an indication that this was known through some sort of divine prophecy, Ruach HaKodesh, not Nevuah necessarily, but some sort of divinely inspired information. Mordechai got some information that normal people would not have been able to tap into. However, he happened to get that information. So that answers that question as to how Mordechai knew this, that there was a decree against the Jews. Okay.
Why her maiden came and told her the information? How did they know she related to Mordechai? It says, and the maiden, came and told her about what's happening with Mordechai. How would they know the connection between them?
Well, that's a good question. One possibility is that it just was very weird. So here's this Jew who's out in the gate of the king, and he's wearing his sackcloth. What kind of business is this? Can't do that. That's weird. That's one possibility.
Any queen will learn something like that. She will interfere.
Another possibility is that Hattach. Well, where are you looking particularly?
And the maiden, Esther maiden, and Enoch came and informed her the queen was greatly agitated. Why should they inform her?
Right, correct. That's a good question. That's a good question. Good question. It's a good question. Good question. Good question. All right, let's leave it. I like that question. I'll have to look into it. Maybe we'll have something to say next week. I would think, before I speak, that's a good question. Let's leave it. Good question. Good question. Okay, Tov. So let's continue. All right, so let's continue. So when Hatach came and delivered Mordechai's message to Esther, Esther told Hatach, by the way, and she totally trusted Hatach. Hatach was a trusted advisor. Esther told Hatach to take back to Mordechai the following reply, quote, all the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person, man or woman,
To do that, not tonight.
enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. That's what Esther said to Mordechai.
Right.
When Mordechai was told what Esther had said, Mordechai had this message delivered to Esther. Do not imagine that you of all the Jews will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, perhaps you will obtain to royal position for just such a crisis. And Esther sent back this message to Mordechai. Go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast on my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, day or night. I and my maidens will observe the same fast. Then I'll go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I will perish. So Mordechai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. Okay, so this is a back and forth between Esther and Mordechai. Esther basically telling Mordechai, I will go before the king, but it's got to wait until my time comes. Mordechai says, go now. The only reason why you're there is because you need to bring deliverance and relief to the Jews. Maybe that's the reason why you're there. And so you need to activate that. And Esther said back, I'll do it. And she crafts the plan by which they should take the next steps. Okay. So I want to analyze this, again, analyzing from the Malbim's perspective, what's going on here.
You
So,
okay, Willie?
okay, so I'm just going to here 1 second. Okay, great. All right. So good. So the first point I want to make is let's look at Esther's. Now remember, Esther's a righteous woman. Esther is God-fearing. Esther was raised in Mordechai's house and was the heiress to a righteous inheritance. She was no bum. So let's be careful that we don't ascribe to Esther some sort of, ignoramus kind of approach, or, let's just be careful. So, and I think the Malbim actually approaches this quite delicately. Okay, so what he explains is that Esther made two very strong arguments, again, rational arguments really, against approaching the king at this time. The arguments were like this. One is, these are the premises for Esther's argument. Okay, so one was that everyone knows that if she approaches the king without permission, she would likely die. All they have to do is look at one case. What's the one recent case? Vashti. They made a law that said that after Vashti didn't come, they made a law that said anyone who approaches the Vashti, is not allowed to approach the king. Okay, so Vashti's not allowed to approach the king. Clearly, if you approach the king, you're going to lose your queenship. You're going to you're going to suffer terrible consequences. So Esther says, if I approach the king, I am going to likely die. And even if the king spares my life, Esther would still likely not be able to present her request to the king. So it's just a bad strategy, says Esther. She's not scared. She's not, scared in the sense of she's scared that she's not going to be able to attain what she's trying to attain. It's a bad strategy. Okay, two, says Esther, this is the Malbim explaining Esther's approach, her premise. Okay, and this is interesting also. I think it's a good lesson for all of us, okay, is that when a person is faced with a likely death or a likely terrible consequences or likely outcome, so a person needs to try every possible remedy and even try those that are unlikely. But however, okay, and why? Why? Because maybe Hashem will save a person even through unlikely paths. And that is the way of the world, is that, Hashem has multiple avenues with which he can extend his rachamim, extend his loving kindness, extend his, extend his saving, extend his Yeshua. And we don't know. And perhaps sometimes it'll be through an unlikely path. And so we need to try every possible path, even those that are unlikely. However, that approach makes sense when there is not a more likely remedy. In other words, you need to prioritize your paths to to solving the problem. If you have likely remedies or unlikely remedies, so first try the likely remedies, and then only then try the unlikely remedies. If a person has, we don't need to give an example. It's clear. Okay, I don't need to give illustrations. It makes sense. Okay, so the king will likely call Esther to have an audience soon. It's been 30 days after all, so it's coming down the pike. So wait, says Esther. Just wait it out. That's the most likely strategy that's going to work. Is that he's going to call me at some point soon. I'll go before the king. I'll ask the king to save the Jewish people. And at that point, I will have been invited, and that will be the most likely way for me to succeed. And so Esther's argument seems to make very good sense as to why it is that she, why she can, why she should be able to, approach the king this way. Okay. Mordechai was unconvinced. Mordechai, his response, which by the way, we'll study, God willing, next week. Okay, I want to see his response because I think his response is illustrative of what Mordechai was, really teaching to the world. So we'll save that for next week. But, just to sum up his approach, Mordechai's response was all about God's divine providence. It was all about the nuances of the hashgacha, of divine providence, of the hashgacha, of God's providence. It was all about how it works, how it influences the world, how we can do our best to tap into God's providence for the world. And all of that was a consideration that Esther really didn't entertain. Perhaps she didn't know about these things. Perhaps she never learned about, how the hashgacha works. It wasn't that she didn't believe in God, chas shalom. She believed in God. She believed in God's providence. She just didn't know the nuances of how the divine providence would interplay with, the world at this moment. So that's what Mordechai was for. Mordechai told her, this is the way the hashgacha works. We'll learn more about that next week, but he told her this is how God's providence will work. She was focused on the practical, on, what will practically work, which makes sense. The person has to be practical. But when there is another avenue, i.e. the divine providence, so then Mordechai said it's appropriate for us to make recourse to the divine providence that will exist, and that will be our more likely way for us to succeed than the practical. Esther was about the practical. Esther was all about what will work, how to influence people, how to navigate people and relationships on the local level. But Mordechai understood that there's a greater opportunity here, and that is to tap into the divine providence. I want to be clear. Esther believed in God. He wasn't teaching her something about God as a belief system. He was teaching her a nuance of the divine providence. He was her mentor. He was her teacher. And so he was using that as an opportunity to teach her something about the divine providence, which she just simply didn't know. And in fact, what happens? As soon as he told her this, she trusted Mordechai that he was correct. She had seen herself, originally she saw herself as the Jewish people's last and best hope, but now she understood that the salvation would come no matter what, and that she could advance the salvation of the Jewish people, but that salvation will not become because of her. It's just that she could move the cause forward of saving the Jewish people, and she was willing to do so even if it meant her own death. And now she was willing to do that, even put herself on the line, because she understood that the saving for the Jewish people would come even if she was, unfortunately, even if she was out of the picture. And so she realized, bottom line, she realized at this moment, she was an agent of the divine providence. And this was a new idea for her, that she could, at this moment, at this very moment, she could serve as an agent for the divine providence in a specific way. Before, she was trying certainly to save the Jewish people. She was committed to the cause, but she was thinking practically. She was thinking relationally. That's the framework in which she saw the solution. Mordechai said, there's a greater opportunity here for saving, and that is through activating the divine providence. She said, yeah, Mordechai, I know that you're an expert in this area. I trust you. I'm on board, and I'm going to act as an agent towards that end, and I'm willing even to put myself on the line towards that end, because I know that even if I die, the cause will still be taken up, and the Jewish people will be saved, and I will have been an agent in trying to activate the divine providence. Any questions about this point? Okay, so I'd like to take one more point in the few minutes we have left. I'd like to take one more point, and I don't know how to get rid of it. We'll just enjoy the art that we have on our screen, and we'll leave that on there, and let's go forward. Okay, I'm not sure how to get rid of that, but anyway. So, excuse me. In the next parak, so we see another aspect of Esther that want to focus on. And so let's read. On the third day, Esther put on royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, facing the king's palace, while the king was sitting on his royal throne in the throne room, facing the entrance of the palace. A lot here of choreography about who is sitting where. The Malbim talks a lot about this, but I don't want to spend time on this issue. But it is interesting how much attention there's given to the choreography. As soon as the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, she won his favor. Boom! There it is again. We see that Queen Esther had the king's heart. The king, and remember, she was going there without his permission. So this was, we know the story. I just want to make sure it's clear. She went uninvited. So she was there, he was there, and she won his favor immediately. The king extended to Esther the golden scepter, which he had in his hand, and Esther approached and touched the tip of the scepter. What troubles you, Queen Esther? The king asked her. And what is your request? Even to half the kingdom, it shall be granted to you. Now she has this big opportunity, huge. She's got the king's favor. She's broken through. She has an audience, uninvited, unannounced. Now he's offering her half the kingdom, up to half the kingdom. He's whatever you want. What does she say? We know what she says. If it please your majesty, Esther replied, let your majesty and Haman come today to the feast that I have prepared for him. That's what she asked. Not up to half the kingdom, not to save the Jewish people. No. One thing and one thing only. Let the king and Haman come to a feast today that has already been prepared. Okay. So the Malbim spent some time talking about why Esther chose this tack. And I want to share with you 3 points that he makes. First, Esther wanted to show in this moment that she had no animosity towards Haman. Remember, this is chapter 5, so a lot's happened since we introduced Esther from the beginning. In the beginning, Haman was not part of the picture. Now, Mordechai knows that Haman wants to destroy the Jewish people, so a lot's changed. So at this point, Haman was Esther's adversary, although he didn't know it. She knew it, but he didn't know it. And Esther wanted to show that she had no animosity towards Haman. She simply wanted to save her Jewish people. So whenever it came to be that she would ask the king for a saving, for help, she wanted never to be suspected that she was somehow personally involved. She wanted to be a very magnanimous and universal kind of a principle that she simply wanted to save her people, not that she hated Haman. 2, Esther wanted to create a situation where she could drop her claim on Haman and not give him a chance to respond to the king. So she also wanted the king, so that's why she said, Haman, come to the party. So whenever she's going to drop the bomb, she wanted Haman there. She wanted the king there. She wanted Haman not to be ready for it. She wanted everything to be calm and easy, and then she'll drop the bomb. So she wanted Haman to be calm. She wanted the king to be calm. The party would calm the king down, and the king would be most able or most likely to pronounce a judgment against Haman. Finally, this is an interesting point that she realized, and this likely was what she learned also either before or later from Mordechai, was that stars rise and fall. That's the way of God's world is that, things that operate in nature, like Haman, operating through the natural course of God's laws, they rise and fall. Haman had been ascendant. Haman had been on the rise. Haman certainly wanted the kingship for himself. Esther wanted to make Haman think through the party that he was still ascending. She wanted to tap into this deeply seated idea that Haman had, that he was increasing in power and increasing in influence and increasing in his royalty. And Esther would use the party, which Haman thought was ascending him, to immediately bring him down. So Esther knew that whatever comes up must come down. And so Haman was thinking he was on the rise, but Esther knew that she could take him down, and that he was really at his ascendancy at this point, the highest zenith of his ascendancy, and that everything else was going down. And that was part of the nature of the world. It's part of how God created the world. It's part of how God relates to those his creations, is that if the divine providence works, that's a different system. But in the natural world, stars rise, stars fall. Haman's going to operate by the natural course. He had been going up, he's coming down. And Haman is going to use this party, which he thought was ascending, to take Haman down. Okay, so with that, I want to conclude. Really, we saw 3 different incidents in the Megillah relating, I think, very illustrative of Esther. One is the incident we saw early on of Esther and Esther's qualities. She was righteous. She had impact at a close distance. And she was also a modest woman. We saw that as well. We didn't make a big point of that, but we saw that she, even in the way in which she held herself with the king, that she was a modest person, and that was related. And so that modesty was another feature of her quality. She did not want to be violated by the king. She did everything she could not to be violated by the king. She stood at afar. She didn't take a gift. She was a modest person who kept herself modest and kept her identity close to the vest. We didn't really talk a lot about this, so I'm kind of summing up here a little bit with the modesty, but it is certainly a theme that we could talk more about. And then finally, we saw in this last couple cases, that she came to learn about the role of divine providence. She accepted a role as Hashem's agent, and she was willing to die, to use her talents to advance Hashem's plan. So, I leave here as a question. I think there's something to think about over the week is, what messages does Esther convey to us? How she is a role model for us, for all of us. So men and women, what can we learn from Esther in terms of how she displayed her righteousness, how she displayed her modesty, how she displayed her commitment to her values, and how she committed herself to Hashem's plan. The ways in which we can see Esther is the ways that we can pattern ourselves after her and learn from her. So with that, I'll stick around. Any questions or any thoughts? I'm happy to stick around. Next week, please God, we will be studying Mordechai in the 4th week, and I wish you all a wonderful week, and Shabbat Shalom.
I think Esther showed wise. She's very wise. The way she acted, she planned it. The way she invited Haman shows that she is wise and smart by going this way. As he said, wait, let's see what the next step. That was the plan.